Welcome to the DMF. I am your host, Justin Yachts, and today I have a special guest with me. Um, I am interviewing Aun.Abdi, the host of the Book Talk Today podcast, as well as the person who created the 1 Minute Book Reviews community. And it's a fascinating conversation. And enjoy. All right. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I have a special guest with me today, Aun.Abdi, the host of Book Talk Today podcast and the creator of the 1 Minute Book Reviews community. And he's also a software engineer. How are you doing, Aun?
I'm very well, Justin. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Well, thank you. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about, how did you get into reading?
Well, the story I like to say, it's a long story.
Yeah.
The story I like to say is that my mum is an English teacher. She still is an English teacher. So I think that love for reading was always there as a kid. You know, we always had bookshelves. There was always books around. We were always talking about books. And I remember, coming back from school, my mum's like, "What did you read today? Read anything interesting?" There was always something around books, ever since a young age. The thing that my most vivid memory is really reading Roald Dahl's books. He was a very famous children's
Mm.
author in the UK. He's written very famous books like Matilda, James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is probably his most famous. And I remember reading his books when I was a kid. You got the little box set and all the
Yeah.
all the books are in there, and you'd just pick out which one you want to read in the evening.
Some of
Like
them are like right in back of me, the
there
Roald
you
Dahl,
go.
because
Yeah.
when I do speed reading, I always like to start with like children's books, and yeah, the Roald Dahl's books are some of the ones I started. So that's interesting that you mentioned that author. So
I think it's just his imagination, I think, captivated me. How someone could
mm,
think about the BFG or the James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, obviously. And that sort of captivated me when I was very young. And then I got into reading fiction really when I was a kid. I think most kids start with fiction. They're not really big. Who's going to
yeah,
read a book on, personal development when they're 6 years old?
yes, the
Unless
48 Laws of Power. Let's start
yeah.
with that for a child.
Yeah, like Baby Boss. I don't know if you watched that film Baby Boss with the evil baby, and he's like
No.
management straight up. No, but yeah, it's nothing like that. So yeah, I was captivated by fiction, and then going to school, reading Shakespeare and studying literature, but also poetry sort of got me into reading a lot more extensively. And then when I studied at university, when I studied politics, that just opened up my world into nonfiction. Then I read anthropology, sociology, psychology, neuroscience, history, philosophy. I just read for 3 years straight and I absolutely loved it. And ever
Wow.
since then, I've just had this thirst that I can't quench. Honestly, I can't. Like an hour or two ago, I just recorded a podcast with a historian talking about the Persianate Empire in India between the years 1000 to 1765, and that just like it's like my dream just to speak to these people. And yeah, I just feel
Yeah.
like I'm living my dream right now. It's amazing.
Wow. 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 That's amazing. That you so, do you have like do you do speed reading, or do you just read at your own pace? How do you normally like to read?
I don't really like. It's a question I get quite often because I do read a lot. Like on
Mm-hmm.
an average week, I can read anywhere between 2 to 3 books a week, outside of work and all that type of stuff. And I don't necessarily. I've never done any speed reading courses or used any speed reading techniques. I've just found a way to read that works for me. Now, I don't sit down and I go with a pen and I go across every single word and I make sure that I've absorbed every single sentence
Yeah.
and memorized everything, because that just that doesn't work for me. My purpose for reading isn't to sit and memorize it, is to get a great, and not a great understanding, but a well-rounded understanding of the topic, to the best of my ability when I sit down and read it. And that seems to work for me because the more books that you read, the more patterns that you can see between different books. And I've actually found the patterns are more important than the individual information that you take from one singular book. So if I can get the general gist from a book and apply some of the things from it and find patterns between other books, that is a lot more beneficial in my experience than trying to extract as much as you can out of one singular book.
Mm,
So yeah, I don't tend to use speed reading techniques. I never
mm.
have. I perhaps might try, but I feel like I'm reading enough, so I don't feel like
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to.
So could you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by like finding patterns in the books?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. This is something I talk about all the time. It's this idea that when you read, I liken it to building a wall. So when you build a wall, you build a wall with multiple bricks, perhaps
Mm,
hundreds, even thousands of books of bricks. And I see reading books as building a wall of knowledge. So the wall is, for instance, this big structure, but it's made up of bricks, but the bricks are books. The thing is, the books are stacked upon one another, and without being connected, you can't get the strong foundation. And that's the way I like to see it, because with each book that you read, you're finding patterns between other books. Like, for instance, like I said earlier, I read this book on the Persianate Empire. Then it talks about, for instance, Timur, who was a 15th century, basically like emperor. And
mm,
then I read another book by someone else on the Map of Knowledge by Violet Monroe, and it mentioned Timur. And I read another book on Islamic empires by Justin Marozzi. And you find these patterns between different books, even perhaps sometimes on different genres. So that's what I mean by finding patterns. And this can even happen in self-development and non-fiction books, where you read a book on, let's say, just one topic like productivity, and you might read Cal
mm.
Newport's book, and he talks about time blocking with, for instance, deep work. And you might read, for instance, Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaretsky, and they talk about time
Yeah.
blocking, but they talk about making a highlight. And Cal Newport doesn't talk about making a highlight. So you sort of get that thread about, okay, time blocking is good, but maybe I need to focus on just one thing for one day rather than, compartmentalizing
Yeah.
my day into minutes.
You mentioned that, and that's a good point. There's a book, The One Thing, and it talks about how just finding that one thing that you need to do every day. Because it's true, you could
Yeah,
time block the whole day, but then it kind of leaves no room for error, nothing to get
yeah,
by. You're just like,
yeah,
oh, it's 3 o'clock, need to do this. 4 o'clock, need to, you would just be
yeah,
that's the way a machine operates, not a human being. Human being needs to like, well, maybe right now is not the time to feel like it, to
yeah.
feel like delving into it. Maybe in another hour I'd feel like. So I believe in like time blocking to a degree, but not yeah, to the point where you're blocking the entire day. Which brings me to an interest. So how long do you like to read in a single session? Or
It's a
does it
good
vary?
question. It varies. Like I just read when I can. I think
Mm,
I read in the mornings mostly before I start work. So my usual routine is I get up, go to the gym, and then come home, do my stuff, and read before I work. Just I feel like it gets me in a good mental space, before starting my day with my actual job, because your brain starts working, you're thinking about things, you just get your brain firing.
yeah.
And then, for instance, I'm preparing for a podcast, I might listen to an audiobook during the day. Or if I'm, for instance, got a podcast later on that day, or in the next couple of days, that I might read in the evening just to prepare. And I've sort of changed my reading schedule, if that makes sense. In the past, it was very much reading for the sake of enjoyment. And I still
Mm,
read out of enjoyment, but now it's sort of got a different flavor to it, because I'm interviewing authors and I need to prepare, similar to the way that you do this podcast. You need to prepare and
yeah.
do your research. So my way of reading has changed, because I need to be a lot more focused on the actual material. Whereas before, I could be a bit more sort of just laid back and relaxed because I was
Yeah.
doing it out of enjoyment, or just purely for myself. So yeah, I don't tend to read for more than 1 hour at a go, just because I feel like my attention span tends to just
Yeah.
waver.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of how I try to, do. Although sometimes I'll like wake up in the middle of the night and it's just like, well, the only thing that's going to get me back to sleep is reading, and then I'll find, oh wait, it's been 2 hours. I read the whole book. Um,
I'm not like I'm a sleeper, Justin. You can't get me up in the middle of the night.
really? Oh, wow, I wish I had
Yeah,
that.
like I have a story. Like there was once in my room when I was a kid, I had these shelves that were sort
Yeah.
of like they weren't like bolted, but they're like bolted into the wall. And I used to put my folders up there from when I used to study, and I had this glass sort of panel on my table. And for some reason, the weight of the shelf sort of dipped and it fell and it crashed and it broke all the glass on my table. And this was in the middle of the night. And my mum comes into my room and she's like, "What was that noise?" And that woke me up. My mum coming into my room and waking me up woke me up. Like the
Not the
crash, the
not the
glass
crazy.
everywhere didn't wake me up. So yeah, I'm probably a robber's delight, but
Yeah. You come in, you
I'm a
wake
deep
up, oh,
sleeper.
everything's gone. It's all
Yeah.
gone.
My books have gone. Oh dear.
Yeah. Just be like, yeah, that would be you. That you'd be telling the police and be like, excuse me, I
Yeah.
don't care about any of this other stuff. Just find the books.
Yeah,
We don't
exactly.
really do that. Do you have a book that you like to come back to like every year, or like a recurring book that you use for
Multiple.
multiple? Do you want to share some of
Multiple,
them?
yeah. Yeah, of course. Um, I think this is why I utilize book summaries, Justin, because like I like reviewing the full book, but often I just review my book summaries. So I'm big on
Yeah.
writing your own book summaries. I know there's a lot of book summary apps out there, like short form, and there's
Headway.
some other ones
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other ones out there, but I'm a big advocate for writing your own book summaries, and that's purely for the sake that you actually learn more from distilling the information and writing it down in your own words and actually reading the book. Like reading the book is informative, but
Yeah.
until you go through it and you write down, review it, reflect on it, that's when the actual learning process starts. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting because I used to read a book, and many people do this. They read books and they forget about it, you know,
Yeah.
3 weeks later. And you write a book summary and then you forget it 6 weeks later. So it's one of those things, like the more that you return to it, the more that it is embedded in it.
Yeah.
And this is where I see book summaries, but also teaching it. So every week on my 1 minute book review channel, I do a live Q&A. And I've done like 70 weeks of this live Q&A. And the only reason I continue to do it is because it is a way for me to embed the things that I learn. If I read something and I can't explain it to someone in a succinct and short way, that means I haven't understood it. I might know it and I might have memorized it, but that doesn't mean I understand it. And I want to try and get to a position where I can understand the things that I'm reading, not just read it for the sake of memorization, because that's not helpful.
Now, how do you go about writing the book summary? Like I
Yeah.
saw that you do that. Like how would you go about it? Like, do you go chapter by chapter? Are you giving an overview of it? How do you start? I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. So this sort of delves in. So I made a video on my YouTube channel about this, about how I go around taking notes and book summaries and that type of stuff. And my note-taking method is, for instance, I would read a chapter actually before that even, like one of the big things that I think most readers don't do is they don't have a question in mind before they start a book. So for instance, if they were reading a book on productivity, they just read it for the sake of reading it because
Mm,
someone that they follow told them to read it. And that's great. And obviously, I recommend everyone does read, but really take the time to think about something that you can apply from the things that you're reading. And that often starts with a question. And I
mm,
liken it to a hypothesis in the science experiment. A scientist doesn't go into an experiment without knowing a hypothesis or something that they're trying to test. And it's the
mm.
same thing with reading a book. You want to know something that you're framing the book with. So that's sort of the bedrock of a book summary or your note taking, is having a question in mind. And then I'd read a chapter and highlight or make notes in the margin. But after every chapter, I sort of write down five or 10 sentences of the chapter, like a summary of the chapter in my
Mm.
own words, embedding this idea of active recall. So you're not copying and pasting the sentences, but you're thinking about the things that you've just read and trying to frame it through that question, and thinking about, okay, these are things that might be good to apply. This is something that I remember. And it's your brain's already starting to do that review process even before finishing the book. So once
Mm.
you've done that for each chapter, and you finish the book, you can then write down 5 or 10 principles that you've learned from that book. So these could be things that could be action points for further research based on the bibliography at the back. It could be things that you want to apply to your own life based on that question. It's just a way to condense the book into sort of a short bite-sized thing for you to then take and put into action. And then that sort of then moves on to a book summary, which is going through the end of chapter summaries and pairing that with the highlights. So I use this app called Readwise. I don't know if you know it,
Yeah.
but you can
Yeah, I know of it.
basically go and scan your highlights and upload it onto their system, onto their cloud. And that has a really good integration with Notion, which is my document management and life management system that I use. It's amazing. And it automatically updates all your highlights onto Notion, so that when I create my book summaries on my Notion documents, I can just copy and paste the quotations from there, so I don't have to go and type them up. So then I can write the book summaries and then input the quotations from there. And that's usually just how I do it. And then if I want to review my book summaries, I can then just go and do that. And if there's, for instance, something that I want to go research further based on the quotation, I already have the page reference from the quotation in Notion, sorry, in Readwise. So I can just go to that page of the book if I need to review further. So
The thing I see that kind of scares me about like the chapter summary, that these book summary apps that are
yeah,
coming out, is that people are just reading the book because they're actually
yeah,
they're marketing that as, oh, you need to read a book a week. Well, here, use our app. It's like, but you're not necessarily reading the book. You're just
yeah.
getting a summary. It's the same way I see Audible kind of and in audiobooks, they're kind of promoting them as the same thing. As like, well, you're listening to it. It's like, but it's not reading. It's auditory. You know.
Well, well, that I have so I think they're different. So I
Mm,
think books, so to go to your point, to Audible and audiobooks, I count
yeah.
that as reading, because for myself, I utilize audiobooks. I love audiobooks. I always
Yeah.
have. And I don't differentiate between a hard copy and an audiobook, because I've listened to like 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson, or Can't Hurt Me
Yeah.
by David Goggins, like
Yeah.
so many times when I'm in the car or in the gym or when I was commuting. Like I used to commute 4 hours a day on my first job by train, and audiobooks were
Yeah.
amazing. So like I'm a massive fan of audiobooks. But your point on summaries is like on point. And the thing that really gets me is it's the same thing as saying, by watching the trailer of Lord of the Rings. Let's say, for instance, you watch the 3 trailers of Lord of the Rings, and it's like 10 minutes long for all 3 trailers. That is not the same as watching 13 hours
No.
of the movie. It's
No.
not. And you're not, if you sit down with someone and you have a discussion about it, you're not going to have the same take. Yeah, you might get like a couple of points, Frodo, Gollum, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But
I
you're
know
not going
that
to
character.
understand who Gollum was, who Schmeagol was, how he came about to find the ring, why he is the way he
Yeah.
is, his relationship with um, Bilbo Baggins, this kind of stuff. You don't get that from just watching the trailer. So, yeah, book summary apps, I get it. I think they can be good to get a good idea of what the book is about before purchasing the book. But you're right, it can get very detrimental.
Yeah.
And I don't like when they sell it as actual reading, because it's not reading.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the audiobooks. Yes, I would consider that still a form of reading, but I wouldn't say you're necessarily reading the book. You're listening to the book, but I wouldn't say it's one is less than the other. Well, I would always prefer. I always prefer to like read the book first, because I just
Yeah.
and then I'll listen to it. Like you mentioned, Jordan B. Peterson, who I like hearing it in his words as well. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
I will use the audiobook as well. Now you mentioned you're reading whenever you can. Do you like to read with like a Kindle, or do you prefer the physical book?
See, like I'm not doing much traveling at the moment. I used to use it when I was traveling into work. I'd take my Kindle with me because it was just light, compact. I have a Kindle Paperwhite, I think it is called.
Yeah.
So I used to take that with me into yeah, that's the one. I used to take that into work with me, or when I used to travel, because it's waterproof and stuff like that, so I don't have to worry about it getting damaged or that kind of stuff. But I'm spending most of my time at home, and if I am traveling, it's like barely anything. So like to the gym or something. So it's
Yeah.
nothing major. And if I was to do that, I'll just use an audiobook. So when I'm at home, I can't see the reason why I would use a Kindle when I've got
Mm.
the actual physical copies behind me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, for me, I like, I like knowing that I have all of them anywhere. Like I can be in a hotel or
Yeah.
something. Like you said, you can be traveling and you're like, okay, I can still continue reading this book and not just like completely, lose it. Um,
Actually, on that point, I actually prefer reading on my computer. I know it sounds ridiculous,
really?
but a lot of the time, I get sent PDFs for
Hmm.
authors that are coming on the podcast. So I've got 3 next week, and all of them are by PDF because sometimes they're not released before they come
Hmm.
on the podcast. So I record the podcast, they send me a PDF, and then I read it, and then they come on the podcast, and then I get the cover. I get the actual hard copy. And I actually like it. And shall I tell you why I like it? Because I can basically just copy and paste some of the things from the book and just put it onto my Notion. Like it's
Yeah.
really easy. It's really easy just to take it from the PDF to
Yeah.
my notes to then review and get questions from and ideas from. So I actually like it. I have no preference on the medium.
Mm.
I just think that if you're learning, if you can understand it to the best of your ability, and if you can use it, then I don't particularly think the medium matters. I think sometimes, actually, I think most of the time people put too much emphasis on the medium. I think there's
Yeah.
people I know that say, I only read books in hard copy. I'm like, why? Why? Why are you putting yourself into that unnecessary box? Like there's so many ways that you can get information. And to be honest, that's the only way that I see reading is just getting information. It's no different to, you know, if you were to read it on your computer or on your Kindle or on audiobook or the physical copy, you're still getting the information
Yeah.
and it's still
It's a
reading.
good point. It's a good point. That's a good point. Do you have just to shift around here? Do you have any top five favorite books? Do you like what are some of your favorites? I'm curious.
I get asked this all the time, Justin, and it
I
really
know
it
it's a
really comes
stock
down
question.
it really comes down to a couple of factors. Like it comes down to how I'm thinking at that point in time. So the context
Mm.
of my life situation determines my favorite books. Because I think about, for instance, like at this moment, I'm going through a lot of changes in the sense of professionally, and I'm thinking about plans and what I want to do creatively and stuff like that. And there's a lot of things happening in my personal life, so I'm trying to like figure things out. So that for me, I will always go back to the book "The Obstacle Is the Way" by Ryan Holiday, because like
Mm.
anytime I'm going through something and I'm trying to push through that barrier and get to the other side, I always reflect on that quote by Marcus Aurelius, which is the impediment to action of advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So it's about, okay, how can I use the thing that I'm coming up against as a vehicle for the thing that I want to do in the future. So yeah, I've always got that in the back of my mind, and I think everyone is going through obstacles in their life. So that book by Ryan Holiday, and to be honest, any of Ryan Holiday's books are great. So, but The Obstacle Is the Way is one of the books that I always come back to, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I love history.
Mm.
So I one of my favorite books is this book called The Map of Knowledge by Violet Moller, which tracks 7 ancient cities from the years I think 500 to 1500 AD, and it shows how knowledge spread from one city to another. And I think a lot of people, when they think of, for instance, Western ideals or Western Enlightenment, think that it originated with free thinkers in Western Europe or whatever it might be, but actually originated in the East. And whether it be ancient China that then moved into Persia, into the Arab world, and then shifted its way across West, I think people have this distorted view about what the origins of Western democracy are. And that book does a really good, it gives a really good account of the Latinization of Arabic text, which is essentially how in the translation it got lost, the
Mm.
idea that the ideas were actually Eastern. Um, Without talking about that book in extent, that is one of my favorites as
Mm.
well. I mentioned 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson. I think that book is fantastic. It's amazing to see the publicity that he's got. Mostly good, but I know he gets quite a lot of bad stuff. But
Yeah.
I think that book, 12 Rules for Life, when I first read it, when it came out, it's amazing to see, him doing the things that he's doing, because that book is honestly amazing. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, like I mentioned, that's one of my favorites, just because it really got me out of
Yeah.
this way of thinking that it really just expands your mind. And I like books that just expand your mind, where you read it and you're like, there's more to this. There's more to this. That it's
Yeah.
you're limiting yourself, and I like books like that. Uh, just I'm going to rattle off a few here. I'm going to give you more than five. Uh, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Um, top of my mind. Yeah, I'll probably go with those. Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky, because
All right. All right. These are
amazing.
great books. I saw on your Instagram you were talking about the 48 Laws of Power, which I just finished reading that, and that was a
Yes.
gargantuan book.
Yeah.
You're just kind of like
Yeah, I know.
daunted by it. It's like, oh wow, this is so much. But what I like about it is he takes a lot of things that have happened in history, and he relates them to kind of what's going on here. He talks about
Yes.
how creating a charlatan thing, and I'm like, okay, I can see that in politics right now. I don't want
Yeah.
to get into that too
No,
much.
please don't.
Now,
I
I
studied
wanted to get
politics,
in.
so
Oh, all right. I wanted to talk a little bit. So, 1 minute book reviews, the community. Can you
yeah.
elaborate on how you created that?
Sure. So earlier I was talking about how I was commuting into work every day, and I was spending sort of 4 hours a day commuting there and back on the train. And I was looking for books to read, honestly. I'd just started my graduate scheme, and I was doing training, I was studying, and I was working in finance. And I was looking for books to read. I was like, okay, how do I manage my time? How do I do this? Go to the gym, but then commute and read and study. Like, I was just looking for ways to improve
Mm,
my life. It was very personal. And I came up against this struggle that no one really does short book reviews. Like, most book reviews are really long, and people talk about their life history. Like, my grandmother gave me this book in 3 years ago, and we used to have, discussions on the garden about what this. And I'm just like, I don't care. Like,
yeah,
you've
just
lost
bring
me.
me to the
Just
book.
give me, just give me something. What is this? What is this book about? Who is it for? And is it for me? That's essentially it. Like, give me a brief introduction about what the book is about. Who is it for? Is it for me? Is it not for me? And what am I going to learn from it? That's it. And then, at that kind of time, I was thinking about, I was working, but then I thought it'd be cool to make content online because I saw other people doing it. And then at that time, Instagram only really had a 1 minute feature for videos. And I was like, let's just start with Instagram before I go onto YouTube. So I started with Instagram, then I started doing my YouTube 1 minute book reviews, and it kind of just grew from there, to be honest. The last year and a bit has been obviously the most growth, because I think most people during the pandemic were looking for books to read, and they were at home, and
Mm,
they weren't leaving, or they weren't going out and doing fun stuff, so they had to read. So
yeah.
I think that was a major factor. And you know the thing that I love about it is that I've been able to connect with so many people. Like, I've connected with you through that, and
Yeah.
I've connected with so many people, not only authors and publishers, but just people that I would consider to be friends now, through that channel. And amazing opportunities have come from it. So yeah, the community is amazing, and I appreciate each and every one. That's why I give my time every Sunday. And you know people might say, why do you waste, or why do you spend an hour a day, an hour every Sunday doing a live Q&A? And I'm like, I just feel like it's just a way for me to give value back. And people
Yeah.
think, you already give enough value. I'm like, you can always give more. Like,
Yeah.
there's no limit to the value you can give.
Exactly. Um, Now you also have Book Talk Today. Did that start from the pandemic? Because I was looking at the dates of when it kind of came in. Did a lot of this come from the pandemic?
No, it's funny because it's just a timing thing. Like,
It's
ever
just a
since I was
timing
a kid,
thing.
I always wanted to interview authors.
Yeah.
Like, I always wanted to. And I was studying at university. And the thing is, people have to remember, is like, when I was studying at university, like, the internet in the way that it is now wasn't the same. Like, Instagram when I started university wasn't the same. YouTube wasn't the same. Now it's sort of become a different beast. And you know, I think part of me was just waiting for the right moment. And I think that, starting the book blog was a great intro into the podcast and interviewing authors. But I actually wanted to do that before anything of all this. So that's why I feel a lot more in my element through the podcast than I do with anything else. Because talking about ideas, talking about history, talking about psychology, talking about the formation of the internet. Like, there's so many topics that I've discussed on the podcast. That really excites me
Yeah.
more than any other creative thing that I've done in the past. And it's I can honestly say it's been the most, like, people say to me, there's like, oh, what do you want to do with the podcast? When are you going to monetize it? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? All this kind of stuff. And I always say to them, like, the podcast is such a selfish endeavor because I'm reading the books, I'm
Yeah.
speaking to the authors, and it's just a benefit that I'm able to share it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a benefit. Like, if I speak to an author about something, not only have I read their book, but I get the opportunity to speak to them about it. Like, that's that's enough for me. Like, I don't
Yeah.
need any more. I don't need X amount of money. I don't need X amount of downloads. Like, for me, that means that I'm doing the thing that I've always wanted to do. So there, that's why I don't put too much concern on subscriber numbers or
Yeah.
downloads really. Like, obviously I do because it's something that I'm passionate about. But at the same time, as long as I'm doing it and people want to come on, then it
Yeah.
feels like a success to me. But yeah, it wasn't really born out of the pandemic. That was just a pure timing thing more than
Okay.
anything.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Um, yeah, no, that's what I love about podcasts is you can, interview somebody. You're in the UK, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I
Yeah.
mean, it shows what technology can do. And you're right. You would have to, like, meet them and maybe have a cup of coffee with them, or go to like a book signing and hope like maybe you get like what one question answered because they've got so many,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
huge line. But yeah, with the
yeah.
podcast you're able to talk to them and just explain that. So where do you see, you kind of already answered this, but where do you see, book talk today and 1 minute reviews, like like
I honestly don't know. Like, I wish I had a big
that's
grandiose
okay.
plan. My plan from the start when doing this was always to have my own publishing company.
Oh wow.
That was always the goal. Like, my goal was always to do this, to grow a following, to grow a network, to then eventually have my own publishing company where I work with authors to help them publish their books
Wow.
on any topic. Like, I don't really have a particular that's always been something I've wanted to do, and it's something that's been in the back of my mind now since probably 2 or 3 years. I'm
Mm,
in absolutely no rush to do it. Like,
yeah.
I don't want to say, I'm going to do it in 2 years or 3 years. It's something that I want to do, and if the opportunity presents itself, then I'd be more than happy to oblige to do it. But yeah, it's that's the big goal for me, like a publishing company, writing my own book. I'm currently writing my own book, fiction book. So that's it. I've got some things that I'm
Yeah.
working towards, but in respect to the podcast and reviews, like anything, Justin, it just comes down to consistency. If you're able to do it consistently, then opportunities come along. So
Absolutely.
the thing that I focus on is just consistency. I was talking to this with my cousin the other day. He's 25 and he's just started a new job. And I was saying to him, like, I had all these plans when I was 22. I was going to do this, I was going to do that, I was going to do that. And I'm 28, going on 29 in a couple of months. And I'm kind of thinking the same things I was thinking when I was 22. So I'm just going to stop thinking about those things and just focus on extracting as much as I can out of every day. And then opportunities will come along.
Absolutely. I think that's what, a lot of people don't like this guy anymore, but Woody Allen said half of life is just showing up. And I think that's really true. You just got to
I think
show
it's
up, just
100% true.
move forward, even if it's just a little step. You're doing something. And then you said consistency is always key. Now, you mentioned that you're writing your own fiction book, so I imagine you've created like a habit of trying to write every day, just a little
Every
bit from
week.
every
I don't
week.
yeah, I struggle to do it every day just because of my
Yeah.
schedule, but I definitely do find time every week. And,
Yeah.
I'm like 40,000 words in. So, like,
Yeah.
that is just purely consistency over like a 2, 3 year period. Like,
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about it. Like, every single day I'm thinking about it. Not a day goes by when I'm not thinking about plot structure or characters or, what if I ended it like this? What if I ended it like that? And that's just sitting in my brain. Like, that
Yeah.
is just sitting in my brain. And I think people like to, like, I've seen some stuff online saying you can write your book in 6 weeks and publish it on Amazon. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
not a
but
good book.
no, yeah, no great book has been written in 6 months. Please, someone tell me a great book that has been written in 6 months. I'm sure J.R.R. Tolkien didn't write The Lord of the Rings in 6 months.
You get like, yeah, like there's the unlimited Kindle thing on
I'm
Amazon. You
just
like
like
read it. It's like a 60-page
99p,
book. It is
whatever.
like just copy and pasted crap. It's like there's nothing there. Yeah, no, it's true, and
Especially
that's
with
what.
fiction. I think I sorry to interrupt you, but I think with fiction
Yeah,
it's a completely different beast. Like I can see
absolutely.
someone writing a non-fiction book in 6 weeks if they have experience in the matter. Let's
Mm,
say if they're a marketing professional or they're a communication specialist and they want to write it. Like I can see that happening. If they've done their planning and research and they want to write it in 6 weeks and they've got nothing else to do, I can see that happening. But to write a fiction book in 6 weeks, I I just don't think that's possible. Just because,
yeah,
like, I like doing research on authors and how long it took them to write books. And all of my favorite fiction books, it took the authors a long time, a minimum of at least 2 years, a minimum.
yeah. That's what I
Some it
would say.
goes up into 10 or 15 years. So I love that. I love, like, Ryan Holiday has this great book called The Perennial Seller, which is about how to market
Mm,
works of art that last the test of time. One of my favorite books on marketing and creating, works of art that last the test of time. Because I think that is the key thing for any creative is if you want to
yeah,
create a podcast or if you want to create a video or a review, whatever it is, how can it be, what is the term when it sort of lasts a
everlasting,
period of yeah, but there's like
everlasting.
it's
So
called like green something. It's like green something. I
um,
can't remember the exact term, but it just means that it lasts the test of time. And that's the way I like to see my podcast. It's if someone wants to come and listen
yeah,
to a podcast with that author based on that book 5 years down the line, then they can come listen to it. That's why immediately I'm not too concerned about downloads because
yeah.
someone might listen to it in 5 years, someone might listen to it in 10 years. Like who knows?
And it's a
So
medium that grows the more you do it. You don't know
100%,
where the growth is, the spike is going to come. You just keep doing
100%.
it and hope somebody kind of looks at it. Now with writing, I try to write like I just make myself write like 5 minutes every day. So I'm like writing a screenplay, and just this idea came, and I was just messing around. I'm just like, just do a little bit, and it's like, even if it's nothing, it's like that nothing is still like, I've found it that it'll grow. Like, okay, now it's been 10 minutes. It's like, just if you can just like get that like one little 2-minute thing in there, you can do that. Which brings me another thing I wanted to talk about. What advice would you give to people that like are trying to start to read but are having a hard time developing the habit? Which, to me, you've read the book Atomic Habits, which be
Yeah.
10% better. And I think that's something that a lot of people can take to it. Like, if you could just start now and create the momentum of doing it like every day, it won't seem like such this arduous task to, oh man, now I gotta read. What would you say to those people that don't read?
I would say that everyone has read a book that they enjoy. Like it's very rare to come across someone who hasn't read a book that they enjoy. Everyone has a favorite book that they've read, whether it's a childhood favorite book or whether it's something that they enjoy reading or listening to. Like someone has a favorite book. Very rare that you come across someone that doesn't have a favorite book. And if
Yes, welcome
someone's
to America.
struggling, no, I think
Unfortunately.
I I no, I do you know what? I think that people underestimate how much people
Mm,
do read. Like I know, and probably not a
mm,
large. And Jordan Peterson says this all the time. He's like, reading's never been an activity for the large population. Like it's never
mm,
been. Like it's always been like kind of not an elite thing in the sense of like financially elite. Well, perhaps even
mhm.
in the past it was financially elite,
Yeah.
but elite in the sense of education. If only a certain select number of people, a small percent of the population really get educated literally in literacy in books that are complex, then only those select people will read. And as that filters down, people get married and they have kids and work, and
Yeah.
that whittles down. So yeah, people maybe aren't reading as much as we both would like, but I
Yeah,
still do think there are millions of people out there reading, and it's great. And
absolutely.
I
Otherwise,
think
there would no one would be listening to
the
podcasts at all.
publishing
You
the
know,
publishing industry would be dead. The
it would be
publishing, if no
dead.
one was reading, they wouldn't be making any more
Yes.
books. So it wouldn't be a good business. So yeah, to talk about actually developing a habit, and
Mm,
I answer this question all the time, and it kind of falls into two camps. The person who loved to read but has stopped reading, and the person who hasn't really read at all, or hasn't really started the reading habit and is wanting to start. So I'll start with that one first, like the person
mm,
who's sort of going cold turkey and wants to start and do that. The first thing I say to them is have something that you're interested in. Like, I kind of put it into two categories: an interest or a skill. So an interest
mm,
could be something like history, or it could be art, it could be, for instance, fiction. It just could be something that you're interested in reading. Like, it doesn't have to be something that you want to sit down and apply into your life, but it's something that you're like, oh, cool, I want to read a book about Caravaggio, art history, which is something that I love to read. I love to read art history, and Caravaggio is one of my favorite artists. And Andrew Graham Dixon wrote a book on Caravaggio, and he came on my podcast, which was amazing. That's an interesting. And then the second thing is skill. So a skill could be productivity or learning or habit formation or mindset, psychology. Like, that's something that you can apply into your life. So I like to think of those two things: an interest or a skill. So before you start reading any book, think about something that you can put it into those two categories, and then choose books based on that. And that is a really great way to start a reading habit, because what most people do is they just go onto a bestseller list and pick up a book, or they're just going through the airport and they want to pick up a book. And that, I've never done that. Like, I
yeah.
can
Seriously.
wholeheartedly say that I've never walked into an airport and picked up a book to read. Like, that's not the way I do it. I do research. I think about it before I do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why most people don't develop a consistent reading habit, because they don't really put the time and effort into think about it, and what they want to get from it. And then you get the second person who has started but is want to rekindle that. And that comes down to rereading your favorite books. And I
Mm,
think by rereading your favorite books, you can rekindle that imagination. If I'm ever going through a reading slump, which I've very rare, because I'm always got a reading book, but if I'm struggling with inspiration, or just if I'm just struggling, then I will just pick up a book that I've read before and just try and get that back. Fiction usually does it for me more than nonfiction. So I might read some Dostoevsky, or I might read some Tolkien, or whatever it might be, some sci-fi, whatever it might be, just to get me back into the groove, because it just gets my imagination flowing. And then, you just want to be consistent as much as you can. Start with 15 minutes a day max, and just try and be as consistent as possible. But what you'll find after 2 weeks, if you're really interested in the things that you're reading, you'll read for more than 15 minutes. Like, it's just,
absolutely.
I mean, what's the flow state? When you're doing something that you enjoy and you're embedded in it, time flies. So that always happens to me when I'm reading something that I enjoy. So
Mm,
yeah, I mean, it's not simple, but it kind of is. But it requires a lot of upfront work that I don't think a lot of people do or don't really think about, which is actually more important than the reading. I think the reading of the book is only 20% of the work that you have to do. Like, people
mm,
think that the reading the book is the hardest thing to do, and I actually that's the enjoyable bit.
mhm. Yeah.
The not enjoyable bit is the preparation and the review and thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people like to look at books and just read it passively and not really
Yeah,
read actively, as we said, like underlining words, or even, coming up with a summary, or even, like they're just done with it and they're not really thinking about what they're reading anymore. Like they didn't really retain enough of it,
yeah,
which I don't know. That seems to be because I just think that with reading, it's almost impossible to not develop some form of empathy. And what I'm seeing around the world is a lack of empathy. And I think the thing that can really, it's almost impossible to read something and not develop some kind of, understanding of like how that person grew up or that person's problems. And I think the more we can get just everyday people reading again,
yeah,
I think that would bridge the divide.
I
between
I, to, I,
in
to, I totally agree.
politics
And
and people,
yeah,
just everything. Sorry.
I think empathy is a good word, but I think a better one is perspective, because
Mm,
I think
yeah.
empathy has this connotation of feeling, and although empathy is great, I think that what reading does is it gives perspective. Like earlier, I was talking to this
Yes.
historian about how important it is to study history, because you can't understand the present if you don't understand history. Like there's no context, and context is so important. Like you can't understand, for instance, what's happening in the Middle East if you don't understand what happened in the split in 1400 centuries ago between Arabs and Arab tribes. Like there's no way that you can understand that if you don't understand that. And we were talking about linguistics in our earlier podcast about, how language has been formed in the UK, and you can't understand how we started to adopt French language until you understand the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and how French language came embedded into English language, and how now so many French words are in the English language. So I totally agree. There's so many books out there that talk about that. Factfulness by Hans Rosling is one of those books where
Mm,
it says that you need to have this perspective of the world. Like in that book, it says, the world's getting better, but we're portrayed this image that the world's getting worse. But it's actually getting better every single day. Every single day the world has been around, it gets better. That
mm,
you look 100 years. I had someone on my Q&A last week that's saying like the world seems to be getting worse, and I'm like, only 100 years ago millions of people died in literally two world wars. How is it getting worse? Like if it was getting worse, that we would be having millions of people dying, more than millions of people dying in consecutive world wars. So
yeah.
it's not getting worse. Like literacy rates are increasing around the world. The more women, more girls are getting educated, less child mortality rates, less women dying at pregnancy, like less actual wars are actually happening. So yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with
Yeah,
you.
that's great. All right, so I like to end with some just nice things to say. So do you
After
have a
after I
beginning?
talked about war.
Well, no, I love what you said. Perspective. That is a better word than empathy, because you're right. Empathy, invokes feeling, and perspective is more, the idea. And you're right. You can't
Yes.
understand where something came from if you don't have their perspective on there. So do you have a beginning of the day routine?
Yes, I do. I do. I do. I'm a man of routine, if you haven't
Yes.
already figured that out.
Yeah.
So I obviously your morning starts with your evening. So I like to go to bed anywhere between 10:30 and 11, and I'm usually up anywhere between 5 and 5:30, sometimes earlier based on my schedule. But first thing I do is just go to the gym. Like my brother and I are in a really good routine at the moment where we get up and we go to the gym. We don't go to the same gym for some reason. I don't know why, but we both get up at the same time and we both go to the gym in separately, which people might find that's a bit weird, but it works for us. And do my workout session and then come back, do like normal house admin stuff,
Mm,
like dishwasher, like people things that people don't like to talk about,
mm,
just get my stuff organized. Shower, breakfast, read, work. That tends to be my morning schedule. Like I'm a big fan of exercising and reading before work.
mm,
That's just something I used to do. Even when I was commuting 4 hours a day, I would get up at 4:45 and I'd at least get a gym session in, or I'd do something before I'd go to work. And if it meant that I only slept less, in that Goggins way, like it
mm,
just meant that I would just do it, because that I'd the thing is interesting, because I think there's a lot made out of, getting 8 hours sleep and getting the right amount of sleep. And I'm all for that. And I'm obviously not disputing all those much more clever
yeah,
scientists that say that a lack of sleep is harmful. But there's also something to be said about being ambitious and about doing the things that you need to do. And I think too often people veer on the side of promoting the sleep aspect. And I'm not promoting workaholism and hustle culture
yeah,
and that type of stuff. But when someone is ambitious and they want to do stuff, it might require them to get less than ideal amounts of
uh,
sleep. And that's not because they want to, or they're doing something that they're not enjoying. It's because they love what they're doing. And I think, if it means having less sleep, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And it's interesting because a couple of weeks ago, I had this conversation with this author about the expectation effect. And a lot of that idea of what you do or the things that you do is based on your perception of it or your expectation of it. If you have a positive view of your sleep, even if you have 6 hours sleep, you're going to feel better than someone who has 8 but doesn't feel like they got enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you feel like you got enough, you can feel okay.
It's not a one size fits all. Some people can
Yeah.
sleep less than others. Some people need 8 hours. I tend to be like 8 to 7 just from, experience and watching it. But you're right. If you needed to get up for this thing, then that becomes a necessity, and you're just going to have to, the body
Yeah,
will adapt to it. Do you
exactly.
meditate at all?
I'm religious. I'm Muslim, so I pray. Like, I don't do
Mhm.
formal meditation. So yeah, I pray, I read the Quran, I read
Mhm.
Arabic texts. So like I don't do formal what it calls Western meditation, but
Mhm.
obviously prayer, any type of reflection is meditation. Like,
Exactly.
people, I might even consider working out to be a type of meditation. I might even consider
Absolutely.
writing to be a type of meditation. So like, I don't do like sit with my legs crossed meditation, but sometimes I love writing. I think writing as a form of meditation is amazing. Like, my
Reading,
mum's an
that's another
artist.
meditation.
Yeah, like fiction especially, yeah. But I just love writing. Like, I'm a big fan of like fountain pen handbook writing, like
Mm.
physical writing. Like the manuscript that I'm doing for my fiction is actually by pen and paper. It's not on the computer. And the reason why is because, like, Neil Gaiman is a famous fiction author. I don't know if you've heard of him,
Yes.
but he writes all of his first drafts by pen and by fountain pen. And the reason
Mm.
why he does that is because you weed out a good idea from a bad idea. If you've written down, let's say, 5,000 words on a computer, and it feels very difficult to delete that, because then you're
Mhm.
starting from scratch with the thing bleeping at you saying you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
But if you've written down something on a piece of paper and you put it to the side and you forget about it, you don't feel like that's wasted. Like, it's not in the
Mm.
same way that you
Interesting.
do a formal document that's on a computer, which, when I heard that from him, I was like, he obviously knows what he's talking about because he's Neil Gaiman, and I'm going to
Yeah.
try this. So yeah, I've been doing that. And I actually think your ideas become better because you can type quicker than you can think.
Mm.
And I
Interesting.
love that
Interesting.
concept. I love that concept because when you're typing on the computer, you can almost forget what you want to actually say. You're just typing for the sake of it. You're almost
Mhm.
like 4 or 5 sentences in the future, but you can't be 4 or 5 sentences in the future when you're writing by pen, because you
That's a
can't
good
write that
point.
quickly.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, for me, I'm a slow typist, so so maybe it is more like a pen for me. But yeah, no, I that's a fascinating insight to that. And wow, yeah, that I had never thought
Like,
about that. I mean,
do you know what? I had this conversation with one of my friends, Adam Lowenstein, who is an author that I've become friends with now, and we have catch ups every couple of months, just offline, on Zoom, and we just have catch ups and we talk about these things, because I think that people like to think that, and people, Cal Newport talks about this as well. People like to think that technology is the savior, and I obviously love the idea that we're communicating on
yeah,
via the internet, and I love tools like Readwise and Notion and Audible and PDFs. Like, I love all that stuff. I absolutely love it. But there is something to be said about the analog as well, like the actual physical process of reading a book, writing in your notebook, using a fountain pen, sitting, reflecting, and doing everything
mm,
manually. Like, there's something to be said about that as well. And I don't want that to be lost in my life. And I
yeah,
that's why I try and talk about it as much as I can, because it's helped me formulate ideas more than anything has ever done. Like, the ability to write down something, if you can clearly write down what you're thinking, I don't I don't think enough people talk about that as a skill. If you can accurately write down what you're thinking, that cures so many of your problems. Because most stress comes from people thinking but not being able to actually tangibly put that into a action, if that makes sense, like put it into
yeah,
something physical. But once you take out that stress or thought and write it down onto paper, it becomes physical and you can see it. It's in your objective world.
Yeah.
It's sitting in front of you. And that can only happen by writing it down.
Yeah.
And I love it as a medium for
And
not
that's
only reflecting
why
and
I like
thinking.
writing down.
There
There's
you go.
something about it. It's very active, as you said, and as you're talking, I'll write notes. So it's like, yeah, that's that's great. That
I can
really
see I've got you
is.
thinking.
You've got me thinking. Now I'm like, I'm trying to. I'm going to segue to something that has nothing to do with it. This is a fluff question. I'm a big film person, so do you have any films that you have
Oh my
recently
God.
watched?
Not I mean, I watched the Minions movie with my niece.
Mm.
I mean, it's the Despicable Me. It's
Yeah,
Minions.
no, I know all
Yeah,
about it. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah. It's absolutely hilarious.
yeah,
It's not like obviously like there's obviously movies that I love, but that was the most recent one I've watched.
yeah.
Um, I love like dark comedy.
Yes,
Like I don't know if you've heard of the film Burn After Reading,
yes. I love Burn After
based
Reading.
on the
That's one of
book
my favorite films.
with
Coen
with
Brothers.
like the Coen brothers and George Clooney, Brad Pitt, John Malkovich in that movie is absolutely hilarious. Osborne Cox.
Osborne Cox. He's like, yes, it's Osborne
Yeah,
Cox.
Osborne
Yes, I
Cox.
know who it is. You just, I don't want to curse here, but I'm trying to keep it PG.
Yeah.
But he
Oh
just
my
like
God, that
cursing out Brad Pitt's character in there. He's just like, I know where you are. As he drives off.
I
It's
love
such a
that
great
movie.
film because
It's
it's
such a
really
great
about
film.
nothing. They're all thinking
It's
this
really
stuff. It's
the thing I love about it is that they're also connected and you're watching it. And I know it's based on a book, and I'd love to read the book someday. I
Mm,
haven't actually had the opportunity to read the book, but I love the idea that they're also connected and their stories are so interwoven, and you think it's going to go somewhere, and it just goes nowhere, and it's brilliant. It's just such a meaningless
yes.
movie, but it's so poignant at the same time. Like you get so much from it by watching it, but it doesn't have a literal
Yeah.
meaning. Like there's no end to it
The end,
if
they're
that in
just
that
like, well,
sense.
we had to shoot him.
Yeah.
We have the woman. He's like, I just pay for her surgeries. He's just like, what did we learn? He's like, I don't know, sir. And then
Oh,
they just pan up to the sky, and I'm like, that's great. I'm like, this
yeah.
is just
Um,
perfect. So funny.
yeah. What other movies? I recently watched a couple of weeks ago, again, months ago probably actually, The Men Who Stare at Goats, based on the book by Mark
I've seen that film.
something Ronson. It's not Mark Ronson, he's the music guy. Who's that author called? Something Ronson. Can't remember his first name, but he's a famous author, British journalist. But The Men Who Stare at Goats, another George
Okay.
Clooney. Random, but obviously it's based on a true story about I think CIA or FBI operative that was trying to train goats for the war,
Yeah.
which was absolutely hilarious. I love movies like that, but at the same time, Christopher Nolan's are amazing.
Yes.
Interstellar, the Batman trilogies, Inception, those movies are amazing.
Dunkirk.
Um, Dunkirk
Such
has,
good stuff.
yeah.
Tenet
I,
was got
I haven't
hurt by
watched
the
that yet, to be
It
honest.
got really hurt by the pandemic, but it's
Yeah,
I think it's more of a concise film than Inception. It's more in that realm of his
okay.
storytelling. Like you can kind of see these patterns. I'm hoping Oppenheimer, which is the next film he's working on right
Yes.
now, I'm hoping that'll be more of a return to The Prestige, which is another
Oh
of
yeah,
my
that was a
favorite
great
films.
movie.
And
Yeah,
I'd
Hugh
like to see
Jackman
him
and
use
Christian
that.
Bale. Yeah,
Yeah, so good.
yeah,
Such
that's
a
a
good
great
film.
movie. Also, I have to throw in Lord of the Rings because I'm a
Yeah.
massive J.R. Tolkien buff.
Yeah.
I actually think Peter Jackson's Hobbit ones are equally as good. So, but my
Really? So
brother and
you
I,
like, yeah, some people vehemently hate
yeah,
those
they
movies.
they only don't like it because they're trying to be too cool. Like
Yeah.
I'm not into that.
I thought
Like
I
it's
thought
a
they were fine.
they were
You know.
excellent. Like I thought they were excellent. Like obviously they're not going to be the same sort of aura as the first
Yeah.
ones, but like they recently, because it was the anniversary, wasn't it, of the Lord of the Rings? I think last year or
Yeah.
this year. 20 years. And my brother and I, they were re-showing them in the cinema, and we were too young to watch it in the cinema when it came out.
Yeah.
We watched the last one in the cinema, but I think we were underage and we watched it at like 11:30 at night. So I don't know
Yeah.
what my mum was doing, but I, we for consecutive weekends we watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and in the cinema it is a different
Yeah.
experience. They're phenomenal. They're
And
phenomenal
that's what I like
movies.
to do is be in the cinema and see that. And when they have those marathons, I just, I just eat it up. Because
You
I
get
did that with The
absorbed by
Hobbit.
it. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
I love that
wonderful.
stuff. But yeah, I can list some more, but I mean those are the ones that come to mind.
Well, that's great. Right. You're a film guy. I love that. When you mentioned Burn After Reading, I was like, okay, all right, awesome. That's my film. I watch that, like, if that was on every day, I would probably put it on. It's just
I watch it. My
so
brother and I
funny.
watch it at least every 6 months.
It's so good. It's such a good
It's so
film.
good. It's so good. And no one talks about it, and
No,
that's
they
why I love
don't.
it. I love it even more for that reason.
It's like when you find somebody that actually knows of this film, it's like, no, 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 no. This is great. This is one of the best Coen brothers film. It's so good. I love it.
It's
Um,
so good.
so thank you so much for doing this. This was great. I learned so much. I think the audience learned a lot. How can people reach you?
Many ways. What I like to say is go and follow my YouTube channel at Aun.Abdi, and my Instagram at Aun.Abdi. Because from there you'll get all the other stuff that I do. You'll get my 1 minute book reviews. You'll get my podcast from there. But I'm trying to sort of veer people towards me, and then they can sort of get interested in the book reviews, or they can get interested in the podcast from that. But yeah, the YouTube channel's under my name, and the Instagram channel and Twitter's under my name, so you can search me and you come up, or just type me in into Google, and I'm sure something. Hopefully PG comes up. Hopefully.
Well, I want to say thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time, Justin.
Thank you. Okay, that about does it. I want to thank Aun.Abdi for doing this. You can find him on Instagram, as he said, on at Book Talk Today. You also has a Instagram page. Aun.Abdi at Aun.Abdi is his Instagram. You can also find him at 1 Minute Book Reviews. There's a link tree there. Check it out. His podcast, Book Talk Today, is fascinating. He interviews authors as he's talked about, and I've enjoyed it. And I just want to thank him for doing this interview. As always, you can reach me at Justin Yachts, and I will see you next time on the DMF.